Hello everybody, and welcome to this video, which is kindly sponsored by Squarespace. So welcome back to the Paladins of Chivalry website building. Today we're going to add some information on the characters we portray, so you can use a standard template for that, adding a new page. We're going to go with a people page because, well, we're describing people, so let's do that. We can then rename both how it appears internally and externally on that top bar, and also how it will appear as a link to the overall website. And then we can adjust where it appears on that bar quite easily. Now we can go into edit it. So to edit it, I'm going to put in some data I've already prepared off screen. So we're going to look at Sir Ralph Neville. He's our first character. And then once that information has been copied in, we can adjust the heading size. It's a little bit off center, so we can drag it up. There's the grid, helps you align it repeatedly across multiple entries. And well, there's the text entries done. And now we just need a photo for Sir Ralph Neville, so go and upload a photo of the member who plays Sir Ralph Neville in his armour. Oh look, it's square, so make sure it fits the page rather than fills it up like so. So we just change that and then centre adjust it and make the corners a little bit more rounded. And just with a couple of clicks of the button, we're ready to go. And the entry has been done. So if after all these little mini tutorials I've been doing you think you could build a website for maybe ideally naval history purposes, but you never know, you might want to do it for some other reason, then head over to squarespace.com/Drachinifel. You can get a free trial, and once you're ready, that little link will give you 10% off your first website or domain. So thanks once again to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and on with the main show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of learning about Insert Navy here. This time in Drac's library, still in this little corner here, we're going to learn about the US Navy. Now, there are a number of books published about the US Navy, to say the least, and well, to recommend all of them would take quite a while. However, there are some rather obvious choices. Luckily, although the first editions were out of print, there are new editions now in print with USNI of my first set of recommendations, and that will come as very little surprise that if you really want to know about the ships of the US Navy, this series by Norman Friedman, so you've got US battleships here, and then you've got US cruisers, US aircraft carriers, US destroyers, US submarines, and there's a small craft somewhere around here as well. Now these are all first edition hardbacks, but there are the new hardback editions published by USNI, again appearing on the screen at the moment, so definitely recommend those, and title's fairly self-explanatory. Now, beyond that, what else can you get? Shattered Sword by John Parshall and Tully, absolutely brilliant for the Battle of Midway, again also still in print. So this obviously then this comes in hardback and paperback versions, so certainly worth your consideration. Now that's a battle, that's the ships. If you can get hold of them, this is a little bit harder, I know it's verging on the edge of what you could recommend for a starter, but if you can find them, there's also Doolin and Garsky's series, so they're US battleships of World War II there. And there's a revised and updated edition. I've actually got both. Now, as I say, those are slightly harder to find new, or in decent use condition, but they're still definitely worth a look. Now, beyond that, what can you look at for the US Navy? Well, for World War II history, there are two excellent series of books. There's Ian Toll's trilogy, and there's also James Hornfisher's series on US naval activities during World War II. I can't show you those because my copies are digital, but I have them. They're just not on my bookshelf, but covers and so forth appearing right now. Now, there are a few other books that I would definitely recommend to get a good feel of the US Navy across history. So many of you will already be familiar with this one, Battleship Commander by Paul Stilwell. Definitely an excellent one to have because it looks at, of course, Admiral Lee, one of our favourite admirals. You've then also got Mastering the Art of Command. This is about Admiral Chester Nimitz, written by Trent Hone, who again has appeared on the channel several times. And if you've ever wanted to read something that the US Navy assigns to its own trainees to read as part of their mandatory education, well, Master Training Art of Command is on that list. Now, if you perhaps want to look at a bit more visual stuff rather than dense text, there's a visual tour of the battleship USS New Jersey, Iowa-class battleships Volume 1 by John Miano. Now, as the name suggests, that has a lot of photos in it, but they're obviously of the ship as in its current state as a museum, but with explanations as to everything you're looking at. There's also plans and so forth. So if you can't make it to USS New Jersey and you thought I didn't cover everything in the video that I did about it, well, that book will pretty much bring you up to speed on everything else. Also, there's another volume coming out, either has come out or is about to come out, whichever one. Now, when it comes to the rest of this, I can advise on some really good books, but a lot of these might be a little bit harder to find. And of course, with some of these, you will have to look at multiple sources until you're happy that you've got a balance of information. So, for example, we've got the Civil War at Sea series here by Virgil Carrington Jones. Very comprehensive. As you can see, there's a 3-volume series. But being that the American Civil War is a somewhat controversial subject still in the US, read it, pretty decent, but there'll be other books that offer slightly different perspectives on some of the campaigns. And then, of course, for general naval history, as well as specifically because it was written by a US naval officer, you've got the influence of sea power upon history. This is the 1660 to 1783 section by Alfred Thayer Mahan, US Navy officer. He obviously wrote a couple of other books, including a follow-up to that, but that is my paperback copy. Again, most of my copies of Mahan's writings are digital, but there you go. Now, if you want to go even further back in history, Cannae has done an excellent book, or I think it's Cannae, maybe. Anyway, he's done an excellent book on American sailing fighting ships, which is a subject that's quite often neglected, especially the ships of the line, the ships of the early 19th century. My copy's over there in the Age of Sail section, so again, item appearing on screen. Then there's a few other things that you might be interested in. Sky ships. History of the airship in the United States Navy. You've got Los Angeles, Shenandoah, Akron and Macon, all to learn about, and also the stuff that they were planning to build after Akron and Macon had those ships prove to be somewhat more successful than it turned out they were. If you'd like a story that's both amusing and heartening and also despairing by turns, you can also get Ship Killers, a history of the American torpedo, and yeah, that's trust me, when you get to the Mark 14 and Mark 18 sections, you might want a stiff drink. Then there are a number of other some older books. You've got United States Submarine Operations in World War II by Roscoe. Pretty big chunky thing. Try and get that back in. Another slightly obscure title, but again one that's definitely worth reading if you can get your hands on it, US Armoured Cruisers, a design and operational history. And there's a similar one for battleships, which is currently somewhere over there and out of reach. If you're interested in the industrial side, just how the US was able to churn out so many ships in World War II, there's Warship Builders, an industrial history of US Navy shipbuilding, 1922 to 1945. This is by Thomas Heinrich, and it turns out I actually have 2 copies of that. If you want a relatively short but fairly heavy read, I Was the Chaplain on the Franklin by Father Joseph T. O'Callaghan, who obviously famously, well, that's him in that photo, and as you will have seen in the Franklin video that I did, was quite instrumental in helping to save the ship. And equally, if you're interested in the other big US carrier incident of the latter part of World War II, that being USS Bunker Hill, there's Danger's Hour, story of USS Bunker Hill and the kamikaze pilot who crippled her. Very much worth a read. Bunker Hill, obviously, as I said, being the other one apart from Franklin, she got hit by a kamikaze, whereas Franklin is hit by bombs. Make sure you remember the difference there. And not really an academic tome, but certainly something worth reading if you can get your hands on it, and I think USNI still stock it at the moment. Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors, obviously the actual full book by Jim Hornfisher is definitely worth a read, but I've recommended that already as part of his series. But there's also a graphic novel adaptation, which is quite useful. Over here we've got another Roscoe book, that's Destroyer Operations of World War II. The Roscoe series as a whole is worth getting hold of. As I say, I've got a mixture of PDF and real copies. It is a somewhat older book, so obviously you will have to qualify that with more modern research, but still absolutely worth a read. It's very comprehensive, and as I say, with the more controversial things and battles where more information has come out recently, you can double check with other sources.
And a few more quickly from my digital collection, all the where I've got books out on loan to people and therefore can't show you on screen, at least in person. So the US Navy Against the Axis, this is by the excellent Vince O'Hara and details the various surface actions that the US Navy undertook in 1941 through 1945. So if you think the US Navy's efforts in World War II were mostly confined to carrier battles, well, think again. There's a lot of different incidents and a lot of things that the US Navy learned from those incidents, as detailed in this. The USNI price for non-members is about $29, $23 for members, and you can get it in paperback for about £22 in the UK. And then we have another book by Trent Hone. This one is Learning War, The Evolution of Fighting Doctrine in the US Navy 1898 to 1945. I actually found my copy of this downstairs next to my bed on my bedside table shortly after recording the main section of the video. This is, as this name suggests, a fairly comprehensive look at how the US Navy learned to fight between the Spanish-American War and the end of World War II, and can be had from USNI for about $35 or $21 if you're a member, or if you're in the UK, you can get the paperback version for £28. And a final pair, I know a lot of people like the Salvaging the Ships from Pearl Harbor series that I did a little while back, and two of the key books which will tell you more information about that are Descent into Darkness, which is by one of the US Navy divers that was involved, and, well, as the title suggests, it's the memoir. It tells you a lot about what it was like to actually be diving down on the wrecked and partially wrecked ships and trying to work with the salvage efforts. That can be had from the USNI for $26 or member price of $21, or if you're in the UK, you can get a paperback for £16. And then accompanying that, you can also get Resurrection, Salvaging the Battle Fleet at Pearl Harbor. And this is a more general overlook, so it has a lot of technical details about what was going on in and around the salvage efforts. A bit of a broader look, but definitely worth reading both together if you can. The USNI price is about $39 or $31 if you're a member. And in the UK, a paperback version can be had for £23. I would highly recommend one or the other or both of those, as obviously the salvage of the ships from Pearl Harbor usually doesn't get that much attention, but was an extremely prolonged effort that required a huge amount of dedication and a lot of innovation by the men involved.
So that's a brief tour of some books I can recommend to get you started on the US Navy. Obviously, as I said, some of them may be a little bit hard to get hold of, but come very highly recommended. Others will be much easier to get hold of. And a good chunk of what you've seen here is published by the USNI, US Naval Institute Press. So if you happen to be in the US, then obviously they're a good go-to. And even if you are overseas, if you order enough, it's still a fairly good go-to. You can obviously become a member of USNI and the USNI Press, and that will get you a discount on all your purchases. And if you don't want to become a member, you can use the code DRACH, D-R-A-C-H, to get a discount anyway. There's also a recommended reading list on there that's composed by me, link in the video description below. So I hope that you found that interesting, and see you again in another video.